Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to talk to you guys a little bit about guys who always say things like, particularly in bodybuilding circles, well, the bench press just isn't a very good chest exercise. And you have to wonder, when you have a big, heavy barbell movement, if you're actually moving the weight through a respectable range of motion, what muscles do you think are moving the weight? Like seriously, what muscles do people actually think are moving the weight? The anterior delts and the triceps are smaller muscles than the pectorals. All right, unless you can strict overhead press as much weight as you bench press, it should be very, very obvious that the chest is doing more work. The chest would have to, in order to move those extra poundages, because the chest is actually using the overhead press too. It just has more emphasis on the bench press. But look how much more weight most people can move on the bench. 50, 100 pounds difference for the same reps is usually pretty normal, pretty common. And the reason you see that is because a lot of people don't do the exercise correctly. And a lot of that has to do with how many people have been hurt doing guillotine presses over the years, which means they're bringing the bar down to their upper chest, has caused a lot of people and even trainers and everything to tell people not to touch their chest on the bench press. Well, common sense would dictate if you take the stretch out of an exercise on the biggest muscle involved, you change the range of motion in such a way that you don't get as much stretch. Again, usually the hardest part that usually recruits the most muscle fibers of any exercise is usually any point where the muscle gets stretched is usually where you see the most muscle fiber recruitment. If you take that out of an exercise, it should be common sense that you're de-emphasizing that muscle's involvement, particularly when other muscles involved can take a larger percentage of the load through other points in the exercise. So you see people who do these partial bench presses, again, because trainers and bodybuilders and other people tell them to do it, and then they wonder why they're struggling to build their chest. Have they considered it's because they're not performing the exercise correctly? That would be like if people all started doing half curls, only at the top, and then curling up to their face on every rep, and never letting their arm bend more than 90 degrees at the bottom. In other words, 180 degrees for your arm is where the bicep stretches all the way down when you lock your arm out. If they avoided the back half of the exercise and then curled up to their face, people would start saying barbell curls don't build biceps, wouldn't they? That's exactly what they would say. If everyone curled that way, it would start being known that biceps just don't really get built with curls, that lat pull downs and rows and chin-ups build bigger biceps. Everyone would start saying that eventually. But that's not how you do a curl. With a curl, most people come at least most of the way down. A lot of people don't even do that, but they at least get pretty close to the bottom. Well, it's the same way with a chest exercise like the bench press. It's limiting your range of motion, changes what muscles get emphasized. It changes what muscles get emphasized, and the chest doesn't have to work it as hard on the top half of the lift. So if it doesn't have to work as hard, of course it's not going to get as developed. And by that same token, people will be like, well, I use dumbbells instead. But then they don't go all the way down on those either. And how many of those guys do you see who do that? They still struggle with chest development. I see guys who do that all the time. They don't bench press, or they bench press with half reps, and then the same thing, they go to dumbbells and they still don't go all the way down. And that's the whole purpose of a dumbbell, is to get a deeper stretch on the pec than you can with a barbell. Now, where we get into debates is whether that deeper stretch below where the barbell touches your chest actually is enough of a difference to matter. That's subject to debate, so we could argue all day long as to whether dumbbells are a better hypertrophy tool for the chest than the barbell bench press. I lean in the direction that they might be slightly better. If that was your only goal, was chest hypertrophy, yeah, I would say dumbbells might be slightly better, but for overall development, I think the barbell is better. Like if your goal was to bring up all the major muscles, the primary movers in proportion, I would say the bench press is better. And this is where I agree with, what's his name, Athlete X, Jeff Cavalier. We're in agreement on this. I think we're the only two people on YouTube saying this, that the close grip bench press is actually a better chest exercise. It's a better chest exercise than the wide grip. And again, I've been saying this for years, and I found out recently people told me, yeah, Jeff has been saying the same thing. And you guys know his sports science background and everything else. And we're both saying, look, it's a better chest exercise. It's a better chest exercise and wider. Why? Because the chest has to go through a longer range of motion on the close grip. Yes, it's harder, but you are going through a longer range of motion with less stress on the shoulder joints. So I lean in that direction, but the normal grip barbell bench press is a fantastic chest exercise. The other problem we run into is not only the lack of tightness. So again, if your scapula aren't pulled back, then your chest isn't getting stretched as much at the bottom either. Well, a proper bench press, your scapula are pulled back together, your shoulder blades are kept together. Well, that's going to stretch the chest more at the bottom and allow for better chest activation at the bottom. Better chest activation is going to be, well, a little more weight, a little more pop out of the bottom because your chest can work harder. It is being stretched, and that's why we could debate as to whether dumbbells are actually better, because if you pull your scapula in tight, you're still getting a potential, although milder stretch reflex at the bottom. And if that harder stretch reflex from the longer range of motion on the dumbbells, is it a big difference? Probably not. It's going to be a very small difference in activation. But I mean, a difference is a difference at the end of the day. It's probably slightly better there. But people don't pull in tight, and the worse, they bounce off their chest. Why are people bouncing off their chest? They're doing it to show off. They are doing it to show off because people have put so much focus in gym and bro culture that how much you bench, that a lot of people will do anything they can to get the weight up, and so they bounce it off their chest. Well, we get back to the same point. It's just like guys that they did nothing but bounce their deadlifts off the floor, and then they wonder why their hamstrings and glutes aren't quite as developed as they could be with the weight they're using on the deadlift. It's the same concept. It's different if you have a muscle that you can stretch and bounce out of the bottom. All right, a squat, it's different. People bounce squats out of the bottom and pop it. Why? Because they can get a stretch reflex, because the muscle is what's rebounding. On something to where you make contact with an object, in this case the barbell hits your chest, or a deadlift where the plates hit the floor and then you bounce, you're using inertia to get the weight started through the hardest part. Well, if you're using inertia to get the weight started through the hardest part, the primary movers, in this case the pecs, don't have to work as hard either. And people do that to lift more weight. And kind of a pet peeve I have there, people say, well, it's comparable. You can't. And they say, well, they're not a power lifter. Well, are they a bodybuilder? Are they trying to build their chest? Then maybe they need to be benching more like a power lifter and pausing so that they get more chest activation. But they aren't, and that's kind of the point. That's the ironic thing, is that you see people who will call themselves bodybuilders, not power lifters, so they don't use the powerlifting technique, which would be pausing on the chest, that would actually recruit their chest more. So they're actually ego lifting to put up more weight because they're not a power lifter. So they won't train like a power lifter. They'd use less weight on the bar. Kind of ironic. And on a side note for that, what people need to realize, when we have standardized lifts for comparisons, it's not done because a person is a power lifter or whatever. You have standardized lifts with similar rules so that you can compare different people's strength. In other words, if you wanted to know if two people had a stronger press or not, you would need to have them do the same exercise to compare, right? I mean, it's common sense. You can't compare someone's chin up to their curl. You can't compare someone's incline bench to their flat bench as a strength comparison if they have totally different numbers, right? They're different exercises. Well, bouncing the bar off your chest is a different exercise than a pause bench. If you're not comparing an apples to apples comparison, you don't know if another person is stronger than another on that exercise, because some people can add a lot of weight with their bounce. There are people who can add 50 or 70 pounds to their bench press with the bounce versus what they can do paused. So, and some people only get 10 pounds out of it. You see the problem? You don't have a comparison. There's no apples to apples. That's the only reason you have standardized lifts in any competitive environment, so that you have a real comparison to know, hey, this guy is stronger than this guy, because they're doing the exact same exercise with the same rules. Anytime people are using different rules for anything you compete in, you no longer have a valid comparison. It doesn't matter whether it's weightlifting or running or anything else, right? You have to have the same rules in a competitive environment. But back to the other point, pausing on the chest with your scapula retracted will give you the most muscle fiber recruitment in your chest. And here's the thing that you've got to note. How many of the people out there who claim the bench press doesn't build their chest that well do touch and go bouncing bench, or they fail to touch their chest at all, and they do 2/3 rep or half rep bench presses? You guys notice a strong correlation? How many guys do you see out there? I mean, and I'm not going to say they don't exist. There's an exception to every rule, and people need to remember that. Just because you can find an exception to a rule doesn't mean that for 90% of people it won't hold true. For 90% of people, you are going to build a much bigger chest if you pause on your chest on every rep on your bench press. If you do the exercise correctly, the chest, the pectorals, are the primary mover. They're the biggest muscle involved, and they're going to get the most out of the exercise. All right, it's simple reality. People have to do bastardized variations of the lift to de-emphasize the chest, which seem to be very, very common, which in turn gives the exercise, which is a massive chest builder, a reputation for not being good at building the chest. And the reality is it actually is very good for it. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.